Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a call to order of the Governors Committee. Today is Wednesday, May 17th. The time is now 6:01 p.m. In attendance, live and in person, we got Committee Chair Joseph Kolovic, myself, and Dr. Cameron Baldwin, also a committee member of STEC. And online, we got Mr. Michael Macaron, committee member, and board member Albert Benedict. And the first item up on the agenda is the approval of minutes dated April 19th, 2023. So I have a motion to approve the minutes. I'll approve the minutes. Can I have a second, Mr. Macaron?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. The minutes are approved. Next up on the agenda is discussion and possible revision of policy 3515, regulation 1330, including its subsections. This item was brought by myself, the school use of school facility policy. And unless anybody has anything else to look at, I would only like to look at, where is it on here? It's to on page 3, heading use of school facilities policy. We, after the first set of 5 bullets, there's a paragraph that states the Bridgeport Board of Education has established a schedule of fees that includes a rental fee for the use of space, as well as labor costs associated with custodial, security, and cafeteria services. All organizations, agencies, or individuals except the following will be subject to the rental fees listed. Currently, there are 6 items listed. The items listed are all school-related student activities, which makes sense. Bridgeport-based nonprofit youth organizations such as Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Bridgeport, number 3, Bridgeport youth or adult activities sponsored directly by the city of Bridgeport, such as recreation programs, civic groups, and cultural groups, etc. Bridgeport Board of Education parent-teacher organizations. And 5, City of Bridgeport municipal agencies. And 6, Board of Education employee groups and activities. Now, the reason I brought this to the forefront is because at a previous finance meeting and previous meetings throughout the years, there's been an imbalance of payments between outside groups, city groups, and the Board of Education. We've been waiving fees for city programs and nonprofit organizations. Yeah, it's great nonprofit organizations, and there's nothing against those programs. But Bridgeport Public Schools, we are the biggest nonprofit program in the city of Bridgeport. We do not turn a profit, neither do they. We help children, they help children. We've got a budget, they've got a budget. And it's definitely come to the point where we can no longer afford to subsidize other nonprofit organizations at the expense of our nonprofit organization and the end users of our nonprofit organization. So I think it's time to remove some of these exceptions from making payments, especially with the biggest user would be the Lighthouse program. The Lighthouse program gives us $75,000, and according to the calculations brought to us before the Finance Committee, I believe it was $566,000. So we're getting a shortfall of 490+ thousand in revenue shortage, potential revenue shortage, by allowing this bypass of the fees. So it is my intention to, well, let's open up for discussion if anybody has anything else to say first before I make the motion. Mr. Macaron, do you have any comments?
I don't. It's very interesting to me that this is the way it's been. So you can continue.
Mr. Benan?
Sorry, Chair, no question for this moment.
Dr. Baldwin?
If I understand sort of the flow of discussion and the line of thinking that you'd like the committee to move in terms of revising sort of the organizations, agencies, or individuals that aren't subject to the rental fees, and taking a closer look at some of the nonprofits or other entities that are currently receiving a reduced fee or no fee for services. You know, I think it's a very slippery slope, and one that when you look at communities all across the state with increased utility costs and labor shortage and not being able to get the work done unless we're using people on an overtime basis. Many school organizations are faced with just what you are describing here. I'm not certain that the shortfall and the magnitude of the shortfall that you're describing is equivalent in other communities, but I would be really hesitant to advise just sort of saying certain nonprofits or certain groups no longer can have this reduced rate or not be subject at all to costs. I think that, you know, further analysis maybe needs to be done. I haven't seen the finance report and what was communicated. I know you've been asking for that at the board level.
Right.
Especially as it pertains to Lighthouse.
Right, they're just the biggest users, not particularly just games through lights for Lighthouse. It's just games because we need revenues. Definitely, yeah, we need to cut our expenses because there is a cost involved to the district, and there is the other side of the lost potential revenue, especially coming from the reason I gave back to the Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is a city-run program, and we're already underfunded by the city. The city got a budget that's like twice as large as our budget. So I don't think our budget should subsidize a budget that's twice as large as our own budget. And it's time. Let the record reflect this. Brown has entered the meeting. And yeah, and I do believe it's a slippery slope to pick and choose. That's why we should have a blanket policy that nobody's free. Or if somebody would like to, I would be opposed to discounts of a certain percentage that's not ridiculous for certain agencies to be probably determined either on a case-by-case basis or on a group class basis or some sort of analysis such as that. But Bridgeport Public Schools can no longer afford to subsidize with that one program alone, close to $500,000 every year. Because if we do, because in reality, it's like, I already know how the city's going to react, because last time the city reacted to this, it's like, oh, Bridgeport Public Schools wants to close down and shut down all our after-school programs. No, that's not true. They want the city to pay for the program that they invest in, so we can use that $500,000 to retain our psychosocial services that are coming up to, or at least a portion thereof. I mean, if we're subsidizing $500,000 here, what services do we take from our K-12 students during the school day? If we're going to subsidize an after-school program run by an entity that receives twice as much dollars as we do and has the ability to tax, borrow, and spend where we do not. I'm going to pause and I'm going to take Mr. Benahan's question. Mr. Benahan has his hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So but for me to understand, and sorry for you to understand me, I'm driving. So my question is all these programs receive a fund, they receive money from the state, different organizations, private. Why is it so hard for them to pay when they use our buildings?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer, Mr. Benahan, and you've been around just as long as I have. And last time we had this conversation, the city started the rooms, just came out, and you seen how the room got packed last time. We tried to get the city to pay its fair share to pay its, not its fair share even, its program costs to operate out of the buildings that we have here. So, yeah, I don't know why it's so hard. I think it's somewhat political. They might have to, because a lot of, I can't pull the cities off the top of my head right now, but some cities run after school programs out of community centers and other places, not even running in other schools. So there's other opportunity. We got quite a few community centers here the city could utilize. If the community, what will the community centers let them in for free? No, I don't think so. I really doubt that.
You're absolutely correct, Mr. Chair, but I'm sorry to interrupt you, but right now, if our board of education start giving layoff to staff because we underfunded, we don't have the money, they start complaining. And they say board education this and board education that. So when the board members, us, the board education, ask why you cannot pay for the, for the building use, it's a complaint. So we need to be fair for everyone. That's my opinion. No more question, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let the record reflect Mr. David Gillen has arrived online in the meeting. Dr. Bowley, might have something else to say.
Yeah, I would just continue to say programs like Lighthouse, are really integral to the work that we do with children and families and helping to engage children and families to keep children safe and healthy and before school and after school programs. And so I think, from my perspective, as part of all of this discussion, you've learned the financial information that you've been asking for. Perhaps we need to better understand what's driving the inability for Lighthouse to pay for its portion of their facility use across the district.
Right. Well, these discussions have been going on for probably like the third or fourth time they're having them. There's always a pushback from the city side that they can't afford it. They'll have to cut programs and that. They're the same boat we are. We can't afford it. We have to cut programs. So it comes down to a matter of what do we want to use our funding, our core services, or the city's extracurricular services, which I do agree they do have value and they will have an impact. But the city could very well step up. The city just passed their budget with a new college program for $500,000. That could easily help the shortfall and get our K through 12 students ready for college before giving out an extra $500,000 of scholarships in a state where first 2 year college is basically for free for people who can't afford it. So the city does have the money to properly fund Lighthouse to pay their bills should this policy be changed. Mr. Benahan.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Question for you, Mr. Chair or Dr. Belden. The same way our budget, everybody know our budget, the city, parents, the whole Bridgeport school, the whole Bridgeport, and another city. Is way we can have the report from the Lighthouse, how they spent the money, the way we showed them where we spend the money, so we can understand them and we can be in the same page. So can we do that? I don't know if it's possible.
I would like to think it would be possible to have them come before committee, but I don't think that would change our mind. At least not in my mind as well. Just like if say we fall short on our rent and our mortgage, the bank really doesn't care why we're falling short. I mean, as a business, we got to look at this portion through a business lens because they if they got the obligations, they need to meet the obligations. And I get what you're saying, and you even perusing the city budget on our portion of the budget, it shows revenues, it shows our state aid, it shows other aid. Lighthouse, you don't see any revenues. They don't show the grant. There's no line for grants on top. There's no line for parent contributions. I understand parents pay like $15 or something like that. That money's not being tracked anywhere, so I'm not even sure the information is available because it's part of their plan is to get a plan in place to account for those funds, if I remember correctly. I might be slightly misrepresenting it, but it's not intentional in any way. But it seems like their books seem to be needing a lot of work, that if we were to put forth books like that, we would be in serious trouble.
Okay, thank
Ms.
you,
Brown?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Brown, have you anything to add? Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, I was,
You
I
got it. Cool.
appreciate this conversation, and one thing that I will add is that for any parent that is listening, we're not saying that we don't believe in Lighthouse and we don't believe in the resources it provides for students. I am a product of Lighthouse. However, I do believe that if there is ways that we can possibly help support our budget, so that we're not put in a deficit every year, I definitely think that we should look for ways to do that. Again, parents, we're not saying that we don't believe Lighthouse is worth having. It's not so much about it worth having, but we're wondering, is it the bill the Board of Ed should be fitting every year, if that makes sense. But I do appreciate this conversation and the clarity on it. I hope moving forward on the board level, there is some type of solution that will come from this, so that we can be able to make sure that our budget is not always, we're strangling for dollars, but also too that, there's some sense of responsibility on the city side, so that we can, if it is a shared responsibility, that's one thing, but we should not have the entire thing on us. That's just my thoughts and my opinions. I'm not sure if that's part of the entire conversation, but from what I joined in, that's kind of my thoughts.
It is, you reiterated perfectly again. I actually mentioned that it's not an attack on the program, and it does have value. I mentioned it, Dr. Baldwin mentioned it. But it is, as you said, paying a fair share type of thing and budgetary item issue. And there is also to note, a few years back, we attempted to seek another program out to operate out of our schools, that the Bridgeport Public Schools would operate. And the money would flow through us, and we would be able to capture those savings there with that. And it would be a Bridgeport Public School program. We attempted to partner with Yale University for a program back under Superintendent Dr. Johnson. And the way those things blew up, I mean, the board at the time was kind of differently thought, and protected the Lighthouse program so much so that they had a vote to override the superintendent to force her to sign the Lighthouse grant, basically against her will. When she had this innovative, the lead educator of Bridgeport Public Schools had an idea to bring in a different program, Yale University, an educational institution, to partner with Bridgeport Public Schools and administer after-school programs. But it actually became basically almost a black mark in her evaluation by being mentioned that she was recalcitrant to sign the Lighthouse thing, which she didn't feel was in the best interest of our students. So there are other programs out here. Lighthouse seems to be sacrosanct, if that's the word, in the city of Bridgeport. And I'm expecting a lot of pushback coming in the future. But yeah. The director reflect, Mr. Albert Benahan is now in the meeting. So I don't, who else? Excuse me. Mr. Gellin, do you have any comments?
No additional comments. I was going to state that is Lighthouse the only, show in town. If we could look at a way to add competition, maybe look at other organizations, companies that could provide a similar service to meet the needs of our parents and our students. And as a parent of the Bridgeport school system, I do know there's an immense value in early drop-offs, late pickups, and just the important it is for parents to go into work and just have that ability to ensure that kids are safe. So it is a program that is absolutely needed. My curiosity is if we can you know, as a board, or, just get some more information, and, can we get another big company just to add competition, perhaps, to see if there's a better deal elsewhere.
Right.
In addition to that, does Lighthouse, is it a contracted, are we contracted with Lighthouse for a particular period of time? If so, is the contract come due soon? Did we just renew the contract?
To answer the contract question first, we have not signed anything in the last 5 or 6 years with Lighthouse. That 75,000 agreement, I believe, came either just when I was getting on the board or just prior to my arrival on the board. So it was out 5, 6 years ago, and the city ordinance, we can't have a contract longer than 3 years. So any contract that was in effect, unless signed and renewed at some point without the board's knowledge, should be null and void. And as far as other programs in the city, we do have other programs in the city. For instance, we got the Carver Foundation. We've got a couple other. There's a second organization out of classical studies as well. I can't remember the name. I can't recall the name of it. And I'm not sure if they're getting a waiver of fees for their use of the building either. But definitely that needs to be part of the conversation. And any changes, of course, I would not expect to take place immediately, but for maybe start of next school year at the earliest, I think.
I think from a policy perspective, what we want to make sure we are talking about is, to your point, the second set of bullets in this use of school facilities policy, the 1 through 6. And we want to really talk about, items number 3, Bridgeport youth or adult activities sponsored directly by the city, such as recreation programs, civic groups, cultural groups. We want to talk about number 2, and just maybe make sure that the board, or at least the committee, has a shared understanding around, what groups we no longer want to provide this exception to.
Right. Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking that there's definitely been further discussion, and I don't think we should push it through today. But in the interim, I think, let's see how to phrase this. Because I'm still not opposed to discount. I mean, because we're basically losing out on probably 80-something% of our revenues when we're counting just the Lighthouse. But I'm not opposed to like coming up with some small discounts for some of these groups. But what and how definitely would take a lot more discussion than we have more on the agenda today. So
we could also
Mr. Chair?
ask.
Yes, Ms. Brown, Chairperson Brown,
So-
Chairwoman.
So around the idea of discounts, I was thinking, does that include student request programs? So like in college, I'll give for example, the students can request a specific program to be brought into the school. Obviously, we'll have to have, staff to obviously make sure that's feasible and, all the bullet points that it needs to cover. But does that include student request programs or just outside organizations overall?
I would say outside organization, because what I'm about to propose would include leaving bullets number 1, all school-related student activities in place, as is. Number 4, Bridgeport Board of Education, parent-teacher organizations in place as is, and Board of Education employee group activities in place as is, because all of those speak to our core function as a Board of Education. So I believe what you mentioned maybe fall under number 1.
As I understand Ms. Brown's question, it would be a group of students come to the Central High School principal and they say they want to start a certain type of group, and that group will meet after hours.
Yeah.
And so I think that what you're proposing does not
would not.
prohibit that type of activity to continue to take place across the schools.
Okay, good. That was good.
All
Thank
right,
you.
so I would like to, okay, wait. Does anybody have anything else to say? Or I try to formulate this, Mr. Benahan?
Mr. Chair, I know we have Lighthouse, do we have another programs in our schools that we know, or we don't know? They use the buildings or only Lighthouse right now?
No, we've got quite a few community organizations using our buildings. What we don't know at this point in time, there's most do pay, but there's a couple of few odds and ends that have gotten waivers. And I don't recall, I could be wrong because we got like hundreds of items and different things on different agendas. I don't recall ever specifically waiving a fee on any of the programs as a. But like I said, we go through thousands of policies. No, I'm exaggerating each time I go. Plenty of policies, plenty of issues come past us. But
My question, I was not in attendance at the finance committee where you asked for specific information. The finance information that you received, did it spell out sort of the number of groups that fall out, that use the facility under item number 2, the number of groups under item 3? Like because we could get that information. These are the groups that right now are permitted exception. It might be helpful. We know that Lighthouse is part of that exception, and we know that we're struggling with the lack of revenue. But I'm just wondering, and I don't know if it's relevant or not, but do you want to take a look at how many facility use rentals have been submitted this year under category 2 and under category 3, and who they are, so that we're pretty clear, so that from a policy perspective, we're making sure we have all the information we need to maybe restructure.
right,
Because that's what it sounds like we want to do.
Yeah,
Restructure.
yeah, what you're saying makes sense, but it's about 1, 2, 3 finance meetings back. I believe we did have the breakdown of all the schools. The reason I
We
just
did.
focused on, we thank you. And so it's in there, like three packets back in finance, but I can't tell you if it was actually grouped by the categories. But I guess we could have that reconfigured for the next meeting into the categories. But the reason for the large focus on Lighthouse is because it's the largest user of the buildings and the largest bang for the buck. And like I said, I don't want to really have because if we're going to look at organizations that help our students, that's every single organization that comes into our schools. So I don't know the tier, like the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts, if they have students in our schools using it, their meeting and say, well, you're not the city of Bridgeport having this, you're tutoring, not the city of Bridgeport. So you've got to be penalized to the point where the city of Bridgeport can't be penalized. So I'm not sure if we really want to, because every group's claim to fame should be, and I hope this is the case, is to help our students and help further their lives and their holistic education. So this definitely bears more discussion, but for the time being, I would like to make a motion to remove number 2, number 3, and number 5 from the first set of bullets and add a new line. Pending discussion, these groups may receive a discount of blank at the discretion of the Board of Education or something like that. Does that make sense to anybody? Or is there a better way to say it?
You read it again?
Just have this paragraph that says the Board of Education has established a schedule of fees that includes a rental fee for the use of space, as well as labor costs associated with custodial, security, and cafeteria services. All organizations, agencies, or individuals, except for the following, will be subject to rental fees listed. And the only things I want remaining under this, motion is all school-related student activities, Bridgeport Board of Education, parent-teacher organizations, and Board of Education employee groups and activities. And I want to move the rest to like the youth programs, the Boy Scouts, organizations considered for a discount rate shall be those three upon approval of the Board of Education. This way we can look at it on a case-by-case basis, and if it's too much, and of course, we're gonna have to send this back next month to committee to decide the percentages and have the groups broken down as Dr. Baldwin suggested. So.
I hear what you're saying. It sounds a little complicated. I don't know. if that-
Right.
Because
Yeah.
because it may start to look like picky and choosy among organizations, and you don't want that to happen. So I really think this may need a little bit more fleshing out, so it doesn't come off that way. Because
Right.
you know, depending on and just saying depending on who the board members are currently or future, you never know what that may look like, and it could be an organization that feels left out or feel, you know, I don't know. If we want fairness across the board, it may help. I don't know. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. And the best way to bring clarity for that is to forget about the discounts for everybody and to treat them all the same, with the exception of the three I mentioned: all school-related student activities, Bridgeport Board of Education parent leader organizations, and the Board of Education employee groups. Because those are our core things, and then we don't have to be selective. We don't have to ever face the prospect of picking and choosing or being accused of any kinds of biases, and we just keep our resources for our programs.
You know, I agree with what you're saying as it relates to item number 1, all school-related student activities. Item number 4, the Board of Ed parent teacher, and item 6, Board of Ed employee group activities. And then I hear what Ms. Brown is saying, that, you know, the presented motion is complicated. And I think it's only complicated because perhaps we don't yet have enough information to help us be clear around what we really want to do with 2, 3, and 5. You know, because we may just be talking about restructuring the 6 items where we clearly say 1, 4, and 6 are so directly aligned with the mission, so directly that those are school-based and they're exempt. And that 2, 3, and 5, well, we believe, we don't know yet, but we believe that many of them continue to support the mission. However, once we see what some of that usage is, we may restructure a fee, we may discount a fee, and we put them off to another, another table so that we're clear. I think to say that the board has to approve it will become unduly burdensome from an operations standpoint, because remember the volume of requests that happen, you know, administratively in the facilities office. And so I think you're leading the group in a really deliberate way, Mr. Sokolovic. So I think like this is a really good conversation. And it's also deeply focused on an area of need, which is our financial landscape. And so maybe the work is that we get the data that was presented and have it that presented in such a way so we can get a better look at items 2, 3, and 5 and determine what our next steps are.
No, it's, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's something that I'm agreeing with Ms. Brown says a little, I don't know, to the, those are, not part of the committee, but as a board member to discuss more this situation to see what we can do for the next time you bring your meeting. So that's my opinion. I don't need macaroni.
Macaron, thoughts?
I'm good.
Mr. Gellen?
I think I agree with the approach of, maybe taking a pause, gather more information um, to determine exactly what the next steps should be. What what we should avoid is maybe presenting something to the board that may require maybe a little bit more digging. So if you could do it in the committee level first, get the necessary information, maybe also look at like what comes to mind is, okay, we remove the discounts, how will it affect the parents? And will it then, if we keep Lighthouse, would they end up paying more, or which groups should we, like the little nuances, I think really needs to be hashed out and looked at in a more a deeper level. So I'm not sure if we just wait for the next committee meeting. Should we have an ad hoc meeting where we, maybe get the necessary players in to, share additional information regarding the finances to determine what items are affected and how they're affected with the amendment with the proposed with the proposed amendment before it's actually proposed. How would those items be affected? So I think maybe taking a pause and gathering on more information. The short of it.
And I'm not opposed to it, but I really don't see that the change to the bottom lines, but I will yield to the majority. If we can have, I'll entertain a motion to have Dr. Baldwin gather the information from the programs. Perhaps have somebody from our largest program come before us and offer an explanation on why they think they should be able to utilize our school buildings, because I don't know if anybody realizes this, but they pay us $75,000 a year when billed. And at the last presentation, when we got the breakdown, part of our package was the director of the Lighthouse program and complaining we were charging too much for toilet paper. Too much for toilet paper. So this is the direction that conversation is going to go. So, I would like to know how much revenues they are receiving from our parents, how much grant revenues they're receiving, how much money they're receiving from the city of Bridgeport, what their cost of staff salaries are, and basically why we should subsidize. I want the city to come before us and say why we should subsidize them to the tune of $460,000 per year when they fell short of funding us by a tune of close to $10 million. So if they can account for that, I'd be happy to ask, right, to provide them with a discount for a city-run program. Let's emphasize a city-run program in our schools. And I'll be happy to have anybody from the city come before this committee and explain to us why they should receive a discount and have them know that they're servicing our schools and our students is not a good enough reason, because every program that uses our school does the same thing. Does that make sense?
It does. I think it makes good sense. And I think perhaps the conversation, we're entering it through the policy framework, which is because we've been so unsuccessful entering it through the political framework with the city and the financial framework with the city. And it would seem to me that, to your point, Mr. Sokolovic, if the city could say, we'll pick up that difference, we'd be happy to, update the policy to reflect the new system that we purchased to automate this and call it a day.
Right. And be happy to entertain rational discounts, not 85% discounts. As the current, I think it's 85%. I haven't really done the math, but so.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Gelli.
Yeah, right. Again, just to reiterate that point, just gathering that necessary information and just understanding the lay of the land just clearly when now presenting this to the city in any forum and assessing what is fair for us will be determined and what is reasonable for us to absorb, which cost is reasonable for us to absorb, then we could bring it to the city and perhaps that negotiation would happen there. So I think I just think this is to your leadership with this, I think is great, and I think this will yield done correctly and meticulously some good results. And I just don't want to affect the parents too much, because I could also imagine some of that discount is passed on to the parents for the program, and I know the fee is nominal, so I want to be very careful as well, with just to ensure that our parents aren't affected as much.
Yeah,
Mr. Chair.
Just let me respond to that, Ms. Brown, one moment, please. The response to that, I agree totally 100%, but then again, we get to, do we affect the parents through the process of after-school programming, because we can only spend each dollar one time, or do we affect the parents in the classroom, day-to-day, the K-12 education? So every dollar can only be spent once. So if we're foregoing a dollar from the city side on the Lighthouse side, and they got to find a way to make it up, and we put that dollar in, the onus is on us to make up that dollar. So it's a sad state of affairs. In a perfect world, we would be fully funded and never even have to have these conversations. Thank you. Ms. Brown, please.
I had a comment, but I'm good. I think just listening back at it, I think I'm in clarity of it. So if it comes back again, I'll share. Thank you.
Right, and I'd also like to make a point about number 5, City of Bridgeport Municipal Agencies. We often see this with recruitment drives for the police department and community forums for the police department. They have 2 buildings of their own that they could do these things. They can do this out of City Hall, or they can do this out of 99 Broad. Why do we have to have the police recruitment drive in this building? Why do we have to use our power, our lights, and our resources to do a police recruitment drive? Why can't they do that straight out of 999 or pay? I mean, so that one probably a no-brainer. If they would like to, if maybe the police chief or somebody wants to come to us and say, we really need to use your building for free, even though the mayor's given us an additional $5.9 million this year, and y'all only getting $2 million, but we still want to use your services free of charge. If somebody could rationalize that to the board's satisfaction, we could also consider keeping that on. But for some reason, I don't think they'll be able to convince us.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Macaron.
I think that's so crazy to think that you're gonna be able to get to get that kind of money coming our way. So why don't we just move on?
Okay. Yes. So yes. And so if you could include like any of the department heads to why they would need to operate out of our buildings rather than the city-owned buildings when these groups are funded at a greater level than us, and I think it's gotta trust that, because it's not crazy to ask for $5.9 billion more, because that's what the police department got. So the city does have the money. They just, not the police department, it's public safety. Excuse me, it's a whole category. That's his education. But it troubles me that a member of the Board of Education, it's like say, the city can't do it. It's crazy when they're funding other departments at 2x, 3x as the level of Bridgeport Public Schools and as far as increases. Mr. Benahan?
Yes, I have the question. You don't answer it, maybe at that time, but I just want to know, are there any charter school lighthouse sorry, are there any charter school student in our lighthouse? And also, do any charter school have lighthouse in the school? Oh,
Free of charge.
I don't know.
okay,
Yes.
please. Thank you, Doctor.
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't think we need a motion, except other than to table this until the next meeting for further discussion. Hopefully having some people before us and, to assume if nobody comes before us that they are agreeing to pay these fees in full. I think that's a logical assumption. So motion I consider a motion to table. Motion to postpone this agenda item until the next governance committee meeting.
Second,
All in favor? Aye.
aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. This will be on the next agenda. The date in front of me. So the next item up on the agenda is discussion and possible revision of 5131 student discipline, including subsections. Dr. Baldwin, I believe you're going to take that away.
Sure. So this agenda item refers specifically to a item that we would find in the 5000 series, the student series of policies. And what we're proposing is that we develop a policy to address cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is a term known in the Connecticut General Statutes. It's found in the legislation around bullying and also student discipline. And so we want to more specifically address cyberbullying through a policy framework so that we can point more directly to it when working with students and families around our expectations around the use of the internet, cell phone use, electronic messages, social media platforms. It is very harmful to young people. It is something that our school administrators at all levels of the organization, but certainly the high school more specifically, deal with on pretty much a daily basis. And the harm that we see happening to children is significant, and the amount of interventions and supportive measures that we need to take for children who are the targets of this is significant. And so the policy that was shared with you is a draft policy that comes primarily through input from CABE, which we are a member of the Connecticut Association of Board of Ed, and Ms. Perrin did some drafting of this policy. So it's in your packet. Oh, it's a plain handout. There it is right there. That's it. You have
That's
it
a
in your
cyberbullying?
left hand. Yep.
That's the next agenda item.
Yep.
Cyberbullies after 3515. Okay, that's cyberbullying. 3515.
Now, we're on agenda item number 3, which is possible action creating revision of cyberbullying policy.
Gotcha. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I read it out loud, didn't I? I apologize. So yes, the cyberbullying policy. I just had basically one question about this. Is the term bullying? That's defined by statute.
Mhm.
So in using the term cyberbullying and referring to an instance flies in the face of the definition of bullying, because a bullying is protracted. The definition of bullying is protracted.
It is not any longer.
So
It is a single incident. They changed that in legislation which is why we've been encouraging the governance committee to revise student discipline policy and so many of these policies, because the Bridgeport Public Schools is not up to date with the current legislative framework. And so the state legislature about 3 years ago amended the definition of bullying so that it is no longer repeated over time.
We have that language anywhere, not doubting it, but it just, I mean, I think at our last, I think that's our last bullying report, I've heard the definition and repeated, Mr. Benin.
Mr. Chair, I know about bullying and cyber stuff like that. I bring it one day to my student information committee, and Jeff, he bring us a lot of policy information. I don't know you was what we talked about that, but you can ask him, or maybe I can check in my package, my student family. And this so we have it, and he told the agency about computers, cell phone, teachers, parents, staff, everyone. You know, and we asked, it was a great item to talk about that. So maybe you can contact Jeff. He will give you more details. Because
Okay.
I just bring it to my committee one day.
Okay, to student and families, you brought it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Dr. Young as well.
Yeah,
Brings up
yeah.
a lot of the definitions of bullying. And because if I, like, for instance, turn over here, boom, and smack Mr. Benahan, excuse me, I would never snack you, sir.
Yeah, that's great. Not the fan.
But if turn, Mr. Benahan files a bullying complaint. From my understanding of the definition, I would just be in trouble for hitting him and assaulting him under the school rules, which is a separate violation. But if I was to do it the next day and the next day, then it would become a pattern under the old definition of bullying.
Yeah.
I just want to be totally sure that me smacking Mr. Benahan one time,
Well,
either in person or virtually, is considered bullying.
as an administrator, you have to use your discretion. And so as you're describing it, I would not think that that was bullying. I would think that just as you described, you hit him, right? But if you assault him and then you have spoken to him as well and said, discriminatory or disparaging comments or speaking about a family member, then taken in totality, that may in fact represent.
Yeah.
bullying. So instead of those things, it's getting a teasing. So same thing. If I was to tease Mr. I'm sorry to keep using this.
No, it's okay. I love it. I love it.
Tease Mr.
Put it
Benahan. Look at all that jewelry, Mr. Benahan. Ha ha ha. I don't like that jewelry. That's teasing, making fun of him. However, if I take a picture of Mr. Benahan's jewelry and post it online and say, the same exact words,
Mm-hmm.
it will fall under this cyberbullying policy, which seems to have stricter consequences
Right, but I would say,
for basically the same incidents.
again, it's judgment on what happened in person,
Mhm.
right? What you described just happened to him.
Right.
You didn't text it, you just said it. Based on all of the totality of an investigation, it may not have been bullying, but it could be bullying.
And then if, let's take it a step further into cyberspace, I believe this covers as well. Now, if Dr. Baldwin later tells Ms. Brown, Joe was talking about Albert's jewelry, he was making fun of him. I don't think you would be able to get in any trouble. But if you were to share Joe's post making fun of Albert, you could potentially fall under his policy. Right?
Correct. So yes, the policy puts very strict restrictions on online and, acceptable use of the district's network, and really requires that students think before they post. And really think is the appropriate word, because it's a good acronym for, is what I'm writing truthful? Is it helpful? Is it informative? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And so all of this goes along with, digital citizenship and teaching, so that we can really minimize, and the goal would be to extinguish this type of behavior.
Right.
But certainly a policy framework
Right.
is necessary.
Right, I'm not doubting the necessity of the policy, and I'm not even disagreeing with having consequences
Right.
for sharing. My hang up is basically on the word bullying, because
Right.
If we could pull up that new state language about bullying, that would be helpful to allay my concerns. And because we definitely need tracks for me slapping Mr. Benahan, me making fun of Mr. Benahan's, and consequences behind that, besides Mr. Benahan taking consequences of his own. But yeah, so something scary is just I mean, it should be a given if you make some fun of somebody on a computer and this and that, using a school device.
Okay, so I've pulled up the legislation. All right, comes out of 2019. And it's all related to Public Act 19-166 is the Public Act. And so,
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
yes, Public Act 19-166. 19 is the year where the legislation occurred, so 2019. And so Public Act 19-166. They amended Section 3 of Connecticut General Statute 10-222D, which governs safe school climate plans and public schools bullying policies and obligations. Section 3 creates 3 new statutory definitions. The first statutory definition is positive school climate. And so they define that. I'm not going to read it unless you want me to. The second is emotional intelligence. Third is social emotional learning. And then it says, most significantly, however, Section 3 of the Act redefines the term bullying. Currently, bullying is defined as the repeated use by one or more students of a written or electronic communication, such as cyberbullying, directed at or referring to another student attending school in the same school district, or B, a physical act or gesture by one or more students repeatedly directed at another student attending school in the same district that, one, causes physical or emotional harm to such student or damage to such student's property, two, places such student in reasonable fear of harm to himself or herself or of damage to his or her property, 3, creates a hostile environment at school for such student, 4, infringes on the rights of such student at school, or 5, substantially disrupts the education process or the orderly operation of school. Effective July 1, 2021, so they passed this legislation in 2019, to be effective July 1, 21, bullying is described to mean an act, a single act that is direct or indirect and severe, persistent or pervasive, which causes physical or emotional harm to an individual, places an individual in reasonable fear of physical or emotional harm, or C, infringes on the rights or opportunities of an individual at school. The revised definition of bullying, however, retains the current statutory language confirming that bullying includes, but not be limited to. So they didn't change any of this. A written, oral, or electronic communication or physical act or gesture based on any actual or perceived differentiating characteristics such as race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, socioeconomic status, academic status, physical appearance, or mental, physical, developmental, or sensory disability, or by association with an individual or group who has or is perceived to have one or more such characteristics. It also notably removed the explicit requirements within the current definition of bullying that both the alleged perpetrator and the alleged victim be students attending school in the same. It no longer, the former definition required that.
Wow. So, yeah, so that's even more. It makes sense now. Always my concerns with this, but then another set of concerns. With that expanded definition, we should district have logically expanded cases. And as is always a concern, is underreporting. If we're underreporting instances, this kid's suffering, but that has nothing to do with this policy. So hearing this was pandemic passed.
No, it was passed in 2019 to take effect in 2021.
Well, so yeah,
So
we really got.
this language took effect July 1, 2021. And as such, that's why Ms. Perrin has recommended that cyberbullying, student discipline, all of this policy framework be updated to reflect.
No doubt, and I applaud this because definitely we should have been doing this going on and on throughout the years, but going forward, we're gonna definitely hear the superintendent's recommendations and the policies up on this committee, but as you know, this is probably a fourth meeting. In the prior 4 years, this committee probably met 4 or 5 times. So this kind of a little disgusted, no reflection, and thank you so much for bringing this, Superintendent Perrin, because this is the stuff we need to know, and this is the stuff we need to be updating, and the stuff we need to be bringing to the governance committee. And for me to be sitting here surprised, I mean, I wasn't on governance, I was on governance before, but a change in definition that's been made since 2019, and not to have it looked at since 2019, to only have it looked at with fresh new eyes here is really unacceptable. And I think anybody in the future needs to be cognizant when having this committee, of being on this committee or serving as superintendent, which Superintendent Perrin is doing a great job of bringing forth these policies that have changed. These state statutes that changed. Not everybody can watch everything at once. That's why I got paid policy services can keep us on the ball as well. But anyway, I apologize for rants. So does anybody else have any comments on this policy? Mike, Mr. Macaroni, you have anything?
No, sir.
Ms. Brown?
I would just say that I'm glad that this is brought before us. This has, in the very beginning, if Mr. Binahan can remember, was definitely brought before our ad hoc district-wide branding initiative committee on anything media related. So I'm glad that it's getting the due attention that is needed, because this was a major concern of ours. And then we tossed it over to students and families, and now it's here. So I'm glad that this is brought before us and will be up to date. My only ask is that as we begin to implement this, that we just as Dr. Baldwin has took time to really explain this, that we created digestible for our students to completely understand, because sometimes they are aware, but it's like they color between the lines. So want to make sure that they really understand what this looks like for them as students. And then also to Mr. Binahan's committee, what this looks like for parents who may have a student that may be involved or participating in negative behavior that can reflect on another student. I think that, this is very, very important because I hold a degree in marketing and communications, and I always tell my students, what you put on the web stays on the web, and they look at me with their big eyes, and I'm like, no, it's real. This does not go anywhere, and this follows you forever. So, the earlier we're able to really explain it for them to digest would be the better. So I'm really appreciate that we're going to be up to date on this. That's my comments.
Man,
Not coming, but I just want to mention, Dr. Butler, what do you read? Can you send me the link, or you can send us exactly what do you read, so I can have it for my record when you get you, please.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
yes,
I'll send it to Ms. Perrin. You could send it to the full board. You want, it's just the 2019 legislative update.
Oh, yeah, I have.
okay, so I guess where would you like to put this? Do we need a policy number subsection to attach it to?
Cyberbullying can be part of the student discipline. You know how some of our student disciplines say 5131 point, like
Right.
0.4, 0.5,
Okay, yeah,
0.9.
right, so-
So it could be folded into student discipline as a 5131 point something.
I'll make a motion at the so just find the software. All right, so I'd like to entertain a motion to. Yeah, I'll entertain a motion to here. Personal attendance in the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Benair. I'd like to make a motion to include the cyberbullying policy presented by Dr. Baldwin and Superintendent Perrin to be included for first read to the full board, be included in the 5,000 student discipline series at the discretion of the superintendent and staff. Let me try.
It makes sense to me.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
So do I have a second?
I definitely second.
All right, now a little further discussion, I would just like to note that this as policy as it affects students should not take total effect until the next school year, and perhaps as a best practice, because it's a whole new policy and it really could either jam up a student from a place where they wouldn't think they're getting jammed up. I myself have been accused of cyberbullying. Currently experiencing issues over such perceptions. That this be sent home as part of the parent packet at the beginning of the year for signature from the parent. So we have a affirmative acknowledgement of the policy from each and every parent.
So what I will say to that is that's fine, but what I think we're going to have to do to make it prevalent is aside, because they signed it anyway as part of recognizing the code of conduct at the beginning of the year. But I think we have to do a little bit more because it's new. Aside from that, so aside from the signature piece, like when there's introductory letters, most school principals send home introductory letters to families over during the summer, in December, talking about assignments. So what I was thinking of, any new language things that are totally new to us that we would send as part of that packet prior to we even sending out because it's so new. Do you understand?
Yes, absolutely. And these are, this was just a minimal suggestion. Okay. Definitely more is better, especially with a policy change like this. And not a policy change, it's policy implementation, basically. So second, any further discussion? All in favor of presenting this from the full board for the first read?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Brown. I'll try to send you this language.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is an update from the focus group regarding school moving closure policy. Just getting out of the way is.
I think we're actually on number 4, the 5131 student discipline.
You got, oh, I don't know, but we'll go backwards now, cause we shoot forward. Yes, I apologize. The next item on the agenda is discussion and possible revision of policy 5131, student discipline, including subsections. Yes, this is the schedule.
Yes.
You know, take it out.
I guess I won't. So what you have before you that came in the packet is I was reviewing some of the K policies, and specifically looking at their student discipline, as it relates to all forms of student discipline. And I was looking at the one that we had comparatively for Bridgeport Public Schools, and there has been some language that has been added that I wanted us to specifically look at as it talks about exclusion, in school suspension. And specifically, exclusion removal is not listed out in our current code of discipline for our students. So we want to make sure that's listed, because when you're talking about removal and exclusion, those can be cited as in school suspension, specifically based upon the time that a child is not in the classroom. And that is not outlined. So we want to make sure that that information is included as well. But it talks specifically about those pieces, as well as expulsion, emergency days, school-sponsored activities, and alternative educations. And we do have information in our current policy around that. But this is the most up-to-date language. And I wanted us to take a look at this and possibly see if we wanted to look at adopting this specific policy as outlined by Kate.
Yeah, this was a monster, these guys.
It is. That's why to try to just pull it apart and bring that. Let me just bring up a piece, because it is huge and it's a monster. But some of the language has changed there, specifically around those items, which are extremely important for comprehension for students as well as parents, as well as school-based administration. So when they're making sanctions within the building, knowing what that specifically refers to. But I know we have been engaged in some conversations with some stakeholders from the community around in-school suspension and what that looks like in Bridgeport Public Schools, because we don't have suspension officers anymore. So I think highlighting those specific pieces are really important from some of the work that we're doing, creating an in-school suspension framework, even though we don't have direct personnel for that.
Absolutely.
Some of the reasons.
Okay, so being a monster,
It is.
an elephant of a policy, there's only one way to do this, and I see it, it's like eating an elephant. We gotta do it one bite at a time. So let's begin by, does anybody have any questions on the definitions? I'm gonna wait till I see a hand. If I don't see a hand, I'm gonna assume no and continue moving. Okay, now we're going to go to page 2 of this packet. One is progressive discipline. Does anybody have a question about the progressive discipline? Because no, okay. While I was working, part of my union contract involved progressive discipline.
Mhm.
And before it was really thoroughly looked at is, if you got disciplined, you got a 5-day suspension for helping off at a passenger.
Mhm.
And then you got a 10 days, next time you got in trouble, you got a 10-day suspension. And the next time you got a 30-day suspension. And then next time we'll go for termination. So what would happen is sometimes it had to be revised, because what was happening is, you have a major incident, you're suspended for 30 days, and the next step in the disciplinary language was termination.
Mhm.
And if you were late to work, you were never late to work before, that would be tacked on into the end of the progressive discipline. Are there going to be tracks for this progressive discipline? Like,
So
talking in class is repeated steps and repeated increments, but talking in class won't be often bunched in with not turning in your homework and creating an environment where several things that are really not really related to each other can cause a student to be suspended or even expelled when it gets to a certain point.
So, to respond to that, I know you're talking about it from the employment standpoint versus the educational standpoint. So with this specifically, as it talks about progressive discipline, it's important to highlight that these are in regards to incidences that are suspended, that come forward. So it wouldn't be in regards to homework or talking. It talks about that there should be a whole school type of approach when looking at discipline. So it's not necessarily, okay, you got suspended today, you were chewing gum, and the next day you were chewing gum again, so you got another day, you got 2 days. That's not what it's meant by. It's meant by taking on the whole approach and looking at the total child on the type of offenses that are being made. But it doesn't mean that you're actually adding on days to that. You're looking at more from an employment stance. So really it's looking at, the types of behavior and how they can be fit into the framework that we're creating around behaviors. So for instance, there are going to be behaviors that are going to be expected to be managed by the classroom teacher and be handled in that. So those might be like tier 1 type of behavior. So maybe a child talking out of turn, a minor disruption in the classroom. But the major disruptions, we'll be looking at it in the whole approach as far as what needs to be done. Now, as far as suspension is supposed to be a last resort. That's supposed to be the end of the line, not where we start. So thinking about that piece, the progressive discipline will look at whether there's like some type of, reflection pieces that you have in the classroom. A child might be removed to go talk to a social worker or a guidance counselor to be able to reset, some type of reflection activity that they have to do. There might be like lunch detention, but it's not outlined to be cumulative in that regard.
Thank you. Makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. Anybody else?
I would just reinforce what Ms. Parent is saying around this. First, to highlight that our current policy doesn't include language that really talks about the progressive nature and the importance of teaching social skills, helping children to change their behavior. And the bottom of this second page, second full sentence, before seeking outside assistance, teachers will first strive to create a change of behavior in the classroom. Disciplinary action, when necessary, will be firm, fair, and consistent in order to be most effective in changing behavior. So all of this, it's that holistic approach and really trying to help teachers and children work together to foster those high expectations, the sense of belonging, understanding how their behavior impacts others, and really using a continuum of responses to help children exhibit the desired behavior we're looking for.
Thank you. Okay, and next up is P5144C. Any questions about that?
I have a comment, if you don't mind. So where it says each teacher, I would not use the term teacher when we could talk about what that would look like, because it says each teacher shall have the authority to remove a student from class when students deliberately causes a serious disruption of the educational process. I think that this should be more of an administrative type of decision or done in conjunction with, because otherwise the way it's written, it would give sole authority to the teacher to be able to remove said student versus working in conjunction with administration to find an appropriate place if that is what is needed or deemed appropriate.
Question. If the administrator is required before taking action, would that prohibit the teacher from removing dangerous student from the classroom? If the kid's smacking somebody, is the teacher gonna run out of the classroom, go get the principal or the administrator and bring them back to the classroom and say, can we remove this student?
Now, what should happen is if a child is seriously disruptive, which is not the hitting, that's another level. But if they're seriously disruptive, they should be contacting the office for security to come and remove the child. That's what I mean, instead of sending a child out. So you put a child out, you're the teacher, and say, Mr. Benahan is your student, and Mr. Benahan is causing disruption and you just put Mr. Benahan out of a classroom without have made contact with an office or an administrator to let them know what's going on. There's no eyes on Mr. Benahan. So what if something happened that causes an issue of liability?
But how about each teacher shall have the authority upon notification of administration? Okay, because the security thing just put something in my head. You got a student who's having an emotional issue, or a teenager, hormones raging. So you got the choice between telling the student, go see the principal right now. The teacher that picks up the phone and calls the principal. I got so-and-so student, I just sent them out of class as opposed to telling the student that's having the meltdown, go to the principal's office, give them a little time to walk it off, instead of having a security guard come and perhaps escalating that student behavior that's in the mix instead of giving them a little second time to cool off. And you'll still have the notification portion.
So I think one of the notification portion is extremely important. However, I wouldn't say that I'm going to say it's okay for a teacher to pick up the phone, because what if that principal is not there or available? So you have to have some type of communication with someone. So maybe it's not the security. It could be the social worker. It could be the guidance counselor. It could be the restorative practitioner. But someone would need to be there, because if that child is at a point where they're that elevated, somebody needs to have eyes on that child.
Absolutely. How about notifying the front office? Notify the front office, because those type of issues you're talking about is probably more restorative to the future. Maybe it's extreme cases like something that needs immediate interventions, and in those cases, those extreme cases, there should be probably exceptions made to the rule. But
So what would you like this to read? Say it for me, please.
no, I'm just not getting back and forth. I don't have anything yet.
My wheels are going too, so I'm just trying to
So,
hear.
Yeah, notification to the front office, and of course, the follow-ups would have to be made somehow. I'm not the educator, so I don't know the proper follow-ups. Do that. Force follow-up to the appropriate staff to address the behavior, some such language like that.
That second paragraph, whenever any teacher removes a student from the classroom, such teacher shall send the student to a designated area and shall immediately inform the
Right.
principal or his or her
That's a good
designee, giving the name of the student against such disciplinary actions taken and the reason therefore. You may want to just rework the front paragraph and put this, highlight this.
Yeah, because once the teacher removes the student from the classroom, the teacher doesn't give the suspension, right? Correct?
No, teachers don't give any suspensions at all.
So those consequences.
So this is specific to the removal of class. So, and I think this language was important, and I believe that this was added because this limits the time a child can be removed from one teacher's classroom. Because then you start talking about the loss of instructional time. If they're continuously a disruption and there is no limit on how many times they have the ability to be able to remove them from the classroom, it causes instructional time. So that was put in as a protection for students.
So, that's the problem, big problem. So if you read down here, 6 times more than twice in 1 week unless each student is referred to the principal. I think the student always should be referred to the principal once they're removed from the class. I mean, if the teacher sent them out of the class, it goes to your point of having something else. So if this policy is not in place, the teacher can just say, get out of my class, and with no follow-up.
But no, and that has
That
happened.
child's
So
out of.
that's why I have the issue with the language of just the teacher has the authority to remove. There has to be something else in there because, you will have certain places where teachers will send a child out for whatever reason. And then there is no follow through with a building-based administrator. And then you find out these things are happening. So I'm trying to create some type of language where, there is an opportunity for a child to be removed if the need occurs, but that is with some type of communication so that administration is part of that. It's very tricky.
Right, yeah, and the second paragraph, yeah, we got goes on to something with integrating somewhere to read that, and know when a teacher sends somebody out, that teacher has to have a direct, chain of custody, for want of better word, of that student, rather than have that student on one.
Each teacher shall
Have.
by the front office
What?
to removing student from class. So maybe each teacher shall notify the front office prior to removing a student from class when such student causes a serious disruption of the educational process within the classroom.
Prior is giving me a little bit of angst. Because you would have to, send somebody to the principal office with the student still there, rather than just like immediately after their departure. Might give more time for the situation to de-escalate.
Right.
rather than saying,
Right.
on the principal right in front of you.
Well, first of all, they shouldn't be saying those things. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a whole other context there because you're correct. If a child hears it, they may not like it. But then what if you call and someone doesn't answer the phone right away? And what if that child elopes from the building? Or what if that child goes and gets into a fight with someone? Like there's a lot of different what ifs that we can.
There's a be my own devil's advocate. I'm calling the principal, but the student gets, oh wait, I better de-escalate himself. That's the.
It is a monster. It is. And we're probably going to look at it a few times, but I think we need to get the ball rolling on this.
So definitely want to have the notification portion on the first part, but I'd be reluctant to limit in any way the teachers' ability to control their own classroom. And having to do consultation first. I don't know if that makes sense then. Because we're not in there. Yeah, but we didn't even get to numbers.
We might be just from a making it clear standpoint, maybe under the removal from class, maybe the first thing we talk about is that no student shall be removed from class more than 6 times, right? Because that's the statutory framework. So maybe we start with that. And then we say, whenever any teacher removes a student from the classroom, we kind of go to the procedural piece. And we can say, students, the decision of a teacher to remove a student from class is a challenging decision and a complicated one. And is only done when the student is causing a serious disruption or presents a safety hazard. It's most frequently done.
Makes sense. And just a question, this is, it's not that they can't be removed more than 6 times or twice in a week, but doing so triggers the requirement to have the formal process carried, correct?
Correct.
Which is, a conversation with administration or whatever support staff that's available to try to figure out what the antecedent to the problem is. So that's really what it's about. Because if it's reoccurring, if it's a one-time occurrence, so you're having a bad day. But if it's continuously happening, that points to a deeper issue that needs to be addressed on a different level.
Hi, Superintendent. This is David. I have a question regarding to that exact point. Is the 6th class removing a student from class 6 times? If a pattern is happening, what is the 6th time the pattern, or if 3 times probably should be an early intervention with maybe, guidance counselor to intervene a bit earlier to determine what's the underlying factor. Do we need to wait the 6 times before that intervention happen?
No, but the statutory language from the state says 6 times in a year.
Or 2 times within a week. So I think, to your point, we would start looking at interventions then, when it happens twice in 1 week. What's going on in the classroom? What are the management strategies? What are the triggers? Do we need to put in more opportunities for breaks? Does the child have an IEP? Should we review that IEP? So it's the 6 times in a year or twice in 1 week.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Benahan.
Also, Dr. Belden, like you say, I agree with you. Also, we had to find out if the student had some issue home. Or the reason, the student come with that behavior, the school sometimes he cannot speak, he cannot do nothing. Now that anger, he came in the school and he act like that. So it's something that investigate. Yeah.
Okay, let the record reflect. We currently have no quorum. Mr. Macaroni has left the meeting. We can continue on as an informational meeting. But from this point unless we regain a quorum, minutes, the PC's taken, but we can still live stream. So the time is now 7:32. This is no longer a committee where we can take action, but we can certainly keep discussing and suggesting revisions, but they have no force of law, no procedural possibility of being referred to the full board at this point, which we likely would not have anybody, because at this point, you're just kicking it around. So if everybody would like to continue in the interest of time and moving these calls, we can continue. Is it okay with continuing as basically a work group? And let's repeat, the time is 7:33 p.m. And this meeting is no longer a meeting, it's an informational session. Okay. Were we finished with the questions on the first removal from class portion? Yeah. And I have a question about 1E. Firearms, deadly weapons, shotgun. Dangerous instrument. Where's the old language? A dangerous instrument, destructive device. My question was in regards to deadly weapon, and it's the change in the language between both policies. And they're referring to 2935, 53206, defining firearms. In the old policy, we're defining firearms and destructive devices. And there was exclusionary language, which I found troubling and strange. The term destructive device under the old policy does not include an antique firearm and rifle intended to be used by the owner solely for supporting recreational and cultural purposes, or a device which is neither designed or redesigned for use as a weapon. That was in the old language. And does anybody know if any of those restrictions remain under like the firearm or deadly weapon section? Because I certainly don't want anybody bringing a rifle or an antique firearm into school.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if those specific pieces are included because it is listed out here as statute as what they define as a fire deadly weapon. But I think when you start speaking about those pieces, if those things are being brought into school and they can be used as a deadly weapon or, possessing these things, I think they still will fall under the same purview because I think that we have to look at intent. Yeah, as it pertains to language.
Yeah, I just found it, I didn't look at the policy that was like just excluded, and I think that might be more towards the way suburban schools. Where they
Or
do-
rural.
rural schools where they hunt and such like that.
Mhm.
I don't see a need for it. Well, we may have a few hunters, so maybe that's why we might need to look to make sure those things are included as well. It's weird to find them excluded. Yeah, it's kind of scared me a little bit.
If you think about, I think that's a good observation that was made. But I think that when you think about what this is talking about, those, even if they're not outright listed here, those will be things that will fall under that provision that the BOE shall expel student. It tells us there that we don't have the right, it's not permissive at this time. They're telling us that that is a mandated expulsion if these things come into our buildings. And it still will fall under, a deadly weapon. Even if it's not listed as not exclusive.
And it could also be considered a dangerous instrument, which is on the next page, which is F,
Yes.
which the standard there is if it were used or attempted or threatened to be used, is capable of causing death or serious physical injury.
Right, makes sense.
So those items that you have identified as
Right,
obstructed
right.
devices could certainly be a dangerous instrument under statute.
Statute's definition. All right, so, okay, we can move on from there, that makes sense. Anybody else have anything on this page D? Let me go back up to this. Okay, yeah, fine.
The only thing I would say there, very similar to the reference that was made about the cyberbullying for H, when it talks about possession, use, transmission, or being under the influence of any narcotic drug, hallucinogenic drug, amphetamine, barbiturate, or marijuana, alcoholic beverage, or intoxicant of any kind. I think what's really important here, when we're talking about possession of, this was a major change in our code of conduct, because prior to possession, would be something that you'd be moving forward for expulsion on, but that is no longer something that's mandated. So that would be something that we would highlight again with like that cyberbullying, because people need to understand the differences, not encouraging it, but understanding the differences in the policy.
This one does not, however, have on school property. This does the dangerous weapons, even G.
Right, so these are talking about the student may be given in-school suspension pre-K through grade 12, suspension grade 3 to 12 inclusive, or expel grades 3 to 12 inclusive for one or more of the following behaviors or actions on school property or at school activities, including but not limited to. So that
Thank you.
language.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yes. Let's get it.
No. Understood.
And the asterisk is what you just mentioned, shall
Right, so we have mandated expulsions, we have permissive expulsions. So
but then it takes the teeth out with the next sentence. board may modify the term of mandatory expulsion on a case-by-case basis. So we basically hold them for a year. Yes, we got to go through formality of expelling a student for a year. But then it says on a case-by-case basis, we may modify that term.
You can shorten
Correct.
the length of an expulsion. The hearing officer who serves in this capacity for the board can certainly shorten an expulsion, but the student has to meet the terms and conditions of any alternative program that we put forth. And that based on meeting those conditions, then the period of expulsion can be short.
But the expulsion process still must happen.
Yes. And remember, we can't suspend a student for more than 10 days. So an expulsion can be for a full calendar year, but it could be shortened. The period could be shortened if the student meets the terms of certain alternative programming.
Stipulated agreement.
Okay, so now, any questions, any other questions on that page? Hearing none, seeing none, next page, student display P5144E. And right away, yeah, I've got a question. On number 1, conduct leading to a felony or class A misdemeanor arrest, if that conduct is determined to pose a danger to the student, himself, herself, other school employees, or school property. Sorry, because it just says arrest. Not conviction.
Correct.
It's very, that concerns me because a lot of us students can be caught up in an area where there's a sweep. Perhaps just watching a fight or just passing by a fight and the police would scoop up everybody. And the student is considered to have been involved in an arrest involving violence. Right? And that student is suspended for a period of 10 days. Later found innocent, not guilty of the charges he was arrested for, as many times the case is. The charges are just silent drops, saying it's not to have been educated in the court of law. That student never gets those 10-day suspension or whatever suspension off their permanent record.
They can, if they're a first-time offender, they can request to have it expunged. But the point here is the person's arrested for a Class A misdemeanor or a felony. And in state law enforcement agencies have to inform the superintendent of schools of arrests. And so Miss Parent's office gets arrest notifications from the Stratford Public Schools, from the Bridgeport Public Schools, from Danbury Public Schools, neighboring communities where unfortunately we may have students who engaged in behavior that led to this arrest. And when Miss Parent's office gets notified, it triggers, first off, we have to figure out what was the conduct that led to the arrest. And then we have to determine, does that conduct pose a danger to the student himself or herself or to the school community? So I've been in situations in other districts where children, put masks on and broke into an occupied home with makeshift sort of weapons and, tried to rob a family. So that's a significant, dangerous behavior. Left school grounds during the school day to engage in that kind of behavior. And so you have to, evaluate, is that conduct that happened off school grounds by kids that led to their arrest? Do we want to just welcome those kids back into school the next day? Or do we think that they might pose a danger to the community?
And I have no qualms with protecting the schools, but no disrespect. I'm not gonna have to bring this up because this conversation before you responded, was dealing with a student that was falsely arrested, having a blemish on his record. And the immediate response was one of bias, the language, I believe, if I could call it, it's no disrespect again, but you said a first-time offender. You're speaking to somebody who was charged with a crime having reflected on their record. That person should not be referred to as a first-time offender because they committed no offense. That person would be considered a victim of the system and should not be thought of a first-time offender. I mean, once these marks go on the students' records and the teachers are informed of them or whatnot, or even if they don't go through the process of challenging the suspension because they got the court case and everything, and they're just glad to have it over. And that mark just remains on the record because it's not challenged. Do we have a way of expunging the record or just
What I,
just not have the suspension entered into their record at all until conviction or something like that?
how I see this, and I may read it differently than Dr. Ball because we have different experiences, is that it says that, the conduct, if it's a class A misdemeanor arrest or felony, the conduct is determined to pose a danger to the student himself, herself, theirself, other students, school employees, or school property. So that has to be determined before any suspension happens. So oftentimes when I get notifications that a student has been arrested, I ask for the details. So like, is it something that happened at the mall over the weekend and something happened there? Or is it something that is going to impact the school community? Because if it's not something that necessarily is impacting students at the school, the property of the school, or taking place on school property, it may not be something that we should be suspending for. So you have to kind of do the legwork beforehand. This isn't, you get a phone call that someone was arrested, you automatically suspend. Because that is not the intent of it by no means.
Correct. I think to your point around the bias language, that's the language in the statute where it allows for expungement. So I can appreciate, you are correct, that has a tone of criminality to it that, doesn't reflect well in certainly our type of organization. But that is the language in the statute that helps administrators understand who's eligible to receive an expunged suspension or even expulsion for that matter on their record.
And again, this has the language of may, which kind of tempers it a little bit.
It's not a mandate. So there's certain ones, of course, you have major issues that, of course, we have dealt with here in the city, even since I've been here, that we've had to move forward with that. However, the may gives the opportunity to ask the questions that will make you create the determination whether we need to move forward with that. And a lot of times it's not, in certain cases it is, but that's where that communication is really, really key to finding out all the details that took place with the child prior to.
So I guess I'm calm on, pretty much okay with that one. So long as somebody's in place that looks at these things on a case-by-case basis. And of course, the security of our schools comes first. But also the rights of our students have to be a close second order.
Right.
Level basis.
Right. And you have to ask those questions because people aren't just giving them to you. I have to tell you that. You'll get the notification, so-and-so was arrested on so-and-so date and time, is this, and that's it. But you have to pick up the phone and say, okay, well, what happened? And you really have to have a conversation to really get that information from the neighboring towns. Otherwise, you don't get that information. If you just read by a piece of paper, you probably would. You cannot do that. I'll be very honest about that. You cannot do that.
Okay, anybody else? If not, we can move down to number 2 on in-school suspension procedures. I think this repeats a couple of times throughout the policies. Part that says must inform Principal must inform the superintendent with 24 hours of in-school suspension. And so whereas other places it mentions students from classes and have what have you. What about the parents? Who notifies the parents?
The building principal.
The building principal as well. And I did see that somewhere else. I just want to make sure it's like front and center.
Does it say it's in writing? Just finish up.
Because then it goes on to 4 again. It says, except in emergency, the student shall be afforded before beginning any period of in-school suspension. The parent again is not mentioned in this section. Because the way this reads is,
Right.
if my child gets suspended,
We have to
he'll go to
add
the
it.
principal's office on his own. I say, hey, I shouldn't be suspended because of A, B, and C. And so far in this policy, as it reads going down, I have yet to be notified. Not that my child will never get suspended.
Say that.
Yeah, I'm not-
That would seem to be an oversight, the fact that we
Yeah.
had, it's not,
He's right.
that would seem to be a significant procedural oversight.
It does fall like under the expulsion somewhere as well. It's just like, I think it's important to be in this section as well.
Yeah. I agree.
We have to add the language about the parent. The parent should be notified prior to enacting the suspension. Whether it's an in-school suspension or not school suspension, parent notification has to come prior to the enactment. And if it's an emergency, it can be done telephonically, but you also should be receiving the written notification as well. Anything else that we see that's an oversight?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to step away from. That was next. Expulsion. Yeah. So in the expulsion, we got the same procedures, the right to advocate and all this. So here, there's one thing I want to look at with guardian of 18. Didn't see any issues with. Anybody see anything need to be raised up on? G? Just. Oh, F, I mean. Did I find anything in F? Anything in G? H. Question as we're going along is, are we still comfortable using designees for the expulsion units?
Yes, because what happens, is he comes through my office, I select the designee. So right now, it's Dr. Wong that designate. So it was myself.
I mean, as far as the 3 hearing officers.
Oh, yes, we're fine with that.
Okay, on I6. Says required under CGS 10-74J to provide an individual learning plan for ages under 16. And we have the option. So it's between 16 and 18. We got to do that for the 12, correct?
Yes.
And it's option between 16 and 18. We've got to do it free of charge, no matter the means of the parents.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have to, family with $120,000 income for family of 3 have to provide a special service for the child, not required to under law, only free of charge.
Are you referring to a student who's age 16 to 18?
Correct.
And so the statutory language is permissive that the board, we don't have to provide an educational program to a student who is 16 to 18. I can tell you that we do. It would be rare not
Cross
to,
not to,
because
correct.
some of those students are very close to the credit requirement.
Yeah, like that.
Graduate.
I'm not even advocating not to do it. I'm just
You're asking.
advocating if there's a possibility to get parents to assist in deferring the costs if they're people of means.
I don't believe there's any necessary language that speaks to that we're able to do that.
It's just a thought.
Okay.
Because that's why I like showing up at all the committees, and it's really a holistic board. Every little piece, it's a section, every other piece of what we do. Excuse me. That's just a thought. My finance thoughts on. J. Okay, that's the panel. Sections.
Can I make a proposal? We look at J, K, and I, and then we take a pause. This, so I think that we bet that we go back and go through it. So then we will have more suggestions as it pertains to the first A through I clauses. So we can split through that, these last three.
Right, your suggestion of pause and. It's a book.
Yeah. Then we can go back through it, and then if we have any other thoughts or anything, versus just.
Could have gone.
Sure, this is all about alternative educational opportunities for expelled students after that.
Oh,
Yeah. So, okay.
right, so 7. J. Okay, 9, I was an expungement, that's good. And I would give me that liberally. School records are.
Monster. You think this is a monster? It's just, it's.
Because I guess colleges will look at the high school records, but once you get into the college and you get the job, nobody's going back and looking.
Right.
You know, let me see if you were expelled in high school. Nobody's looking at that.
Be verification.
To the college will determine what kind of job you get and stuff like that. So it's kindergarten through anything. Okay, wait a minute. Number 10. Kindergarten to 8 inclusive. There was I missed it. There was an exception to expelling K-3 student in the case of a firearm.
The way the statutory language is written, there are only certain things that students in grades K-2 can be suspended for. It is quite an extensive list, but they are not necessarily excluded. We have to take into developmental maturity at that time and different measures, but they can be expelled for that as well.
And would they fall under the statute where you got to get a 1-year expulsion?
According to this, yes.
It's okay. Teenagers basically don't have fully formed minds, and they understand. Even more so for a younger children, where these things should still be considered toys. I know we've got the rare case where a student brought a gun to school and shot. Had several warnings, but
again, remember that the language says that the Board of Education may.
Right.
So in a situation like that, the developmental maturity of that child and other factors, and see if there will be a stipulated agreement to that mandated expulsion.
Thank you.
I understand.
I'm overprotective. What can I say?
Good instinct.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, here, where it talks about the notification to parents. It's just not directly tied to that very first regulation. It had to be somewhere. Yep. In case important, specifically this year, like we're having the meeting with parents tonight for students with special educational needs about IEEs. And I stopped by there before I came here, but I think like this section would be really important to share because this constantly comes up in questions surrounding this for students with disabilities.
Right. So how do we differentiate? Number 3, I might be going in a different direction with this.
About number 3 under K?
Yes. It's caused by the disability. You got student A who already has an IEP, and student B who doesn't have an IEP, but through the same behavioral outburst is found to have the disability afterwards.
So what happens is,
Yes.
well, I mean, let's let you finish your.
Yeah, I think you anticipate the disparate treatment. One's disability is documented as opposed to one who's been documented.
So if there is a history of behaviors where we suspect that a child has a disability, when you have the manifestation, what has to happen at the meeting, that there is a hard pause that's put on until the completion of all evaluation. So say, for instance, you're in my class and I suspected that you were having behaviors all along and you did something that was very similar. We go to have the manifestation, we have to bring up all those behaviors at that time. And one of the questions is, you know, do we have this a failure to implement the IEP, or is this the district's failure to be able to meet the needs of the students, basically? And if we see that there are issues, then we have to stop and assess. So we would go to PPT at that time and recommend a battery of assessments. Usually the cognitive pieces, if there's behavioral pieces, you know, behavioral skills, social emotional piece, social developmental history, as well as anything else, if there's any OT needs, anything of that nature. And then you use that timeline to be able to, the child stays in place, stays put during that time, completes the evaluation. We have PPT to talk about whether the child is eligible for services. If the child is not eligible for services, then we can go back to the PPT manifestation and say, no, it's not a manifestation of disability, and it can move forward. If it is, the child is eligible for services, and depending on what that exceptionality is, we can make the determination whether it's a manifestation or whether it isn't. So you can't just move forward and say, oh, we'll do that later. You have to stop. It's mandated. And, you know, using the timeline depends, even like say, for instance, if something like that happens now, we would have to wait. The timeline would continue through the summertime and you would have to still be able to do that work, but you could not work without having a clear understanding of what it is, an exceptionality or not.
Right. And how often is it found, like in one of these outbursts or something like that, that the student was actually an unrecognized student in need of an IEP?
You'll see in our data, you know, Ms. Perrin just described the process really clearly. But if you look at our data, we have more referrals to expulsion than we have hearings. And it's because discipline was applied. It was a serious violation of policy. The students referred for expulsion. And then upon review, we realized this is a child find issue. You need to go to PPT because the behaviors have been persistent. The child was never referred for testing.
Listening and thing. Didn't see nothing, anything. I see something before, somewhere where it was that actually bothered me. And probably was in old policies, way embedded in that news policy. And one of the weapons, they mentioned a Chinese star. Yes, that's actually the only weapon that's mentioned by geography
And ethnicity.
and ethnicity. And two, it's incorrect. The throwing star originated in Japan. So,
Well, I think maybe that's why the language is now just talks about dangerous instruments.
so I think it was probably, you know.
Yeah.
So when you said you wanted to pause, did you want to go through it again here and now, or till the next meeting? Or?
I think we should pause to the next meeting and have an opportunity to go through this again. So that way we can then say whether we want to move forward with any language changes for first read for the board. Because I know that this is just information.
Definitely discussed enough.
Right.
And it might actually be. How long did we just cut this up now? It's like an hour. I would change at least, right?
At least an hour, at least an hour.
So I'm wondering if maybe we should. I mean, I don't mind sitting here doing it. We oftentimes can have 2-3 hour meetings here, just get effective work done, but I think in front of the full board with other substantial agenda items, I don't think we'll be effective in doing it in one piece. So maybe we could break it off into maybe
Pieces.
working chunks
Right, okay.
for the full board. We could continue working this way here, so long as there's not too many agenda items to attack at once.
I'm definitely gonna work on specifically trying to draft some language around that first part for removal of students so that it can be a little bit clearer. And see if we can capture everyone's suggestions. And also see if we want to move the language in K, because it is at the end of parental notification, to more of the forefront, because it seems like it could get lost.
Yes.
Because people may just stop reading too, which can cause a problem. We want people to know. So if we can outline those specific things, almost like as a precursor before going into the main document about, in school suspension, expulsion.
Right.
And then what are the key pieces for each, and then they can go into the rest of the document.
Excuse me. The next item, well, it's not really an agenda. The next item up for discussion is an update from the focus group report regarding school moving policy, moving/closure policy, which I should have updated the new name to it, but it escapes me at this moment.
Yeah, what we have, I mean, we had our work group meeting online, 2 weeks ago. We called it school construction and relocation to new school facility. And so we're really at the point where, the regulations need to be developed. We had policy, overarching policy language that was shared. And then, we learned about some of the work in facilities, operations. We identified areas that business operations would need to set up regulations. We identified areas that the school principal would absolutely have to be mindful of regulations and have responsibilities. And so I think that that's what I heard the committee describe when we last met, was that we need to build out those regulations by system, by operation area, business, facilities, logistics, the school committee, the building committee. So that's where we are.
Do we have a date for the next meeting in our work group, or we want to get?
So we want to have that next work group after. I was waiting for Dr. Baldwin because we're having the actual meeting for BMA Bassett to see if anything came out of that we wanted to include. So that is happening on Monday, correct, Dr. Baldwin? So after that, so I'll be reaching out with the date very soon. Okay.
And we got next up the agenda. I don't know. Can we? I think I'd like to bring up this next thing on the screen. Do we have that possibility?
Did she send you the document?
No, it's in the packet. Yeah, it's not separated. There's just a couple of things I would like to be absolutely clear and noted for the informational section recording, if not for the record. So the packet is in the very, very back.
Arlene?
I'm here.
Can you please send that document to Sam so he can put it on the screen? For achievement first?
I just did.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I've been to Meriden, Hartford, back to the IE meeting, Livingston here. Good to me. About 15 to 20 parents at the IE.
More than one.
No,
This was what we were doing for here. About independent.
You know, the patients.
That's way back, just,
Ask for them.
right.
They have pages.
Right, scan.
Member of his parent.
See, you can start at.
He and his partner are the ones who were doing it.
And they look like their landscape.
So, and I explained to the parents, the system, well, he used to be.
Why is that showing up the pages? If you go to the back and
That's
just scroll forward to 15, I just.
I said, ask the question.
Have page numbers on the pages?
Afraid to ask the question. You have to have an understanding because everything is a system. You have to understand it's a system. We can't just say, you can say, oh, well, my kid wants an IEP. So sure. That's just like this.
That's Irene Parisi's.
You get more.
That's the
First
first page.
intimidating when you don't. So it's why I know it's because.
Yes, and way in the back, Sam.
Because the last page, few pages are landscape. I can put it up. Can you guys-
Sarah, she's from Spanish. Ask them to give us the copy
What's the section talk about?
so that we could get it.
You want to start with the letter?
See.
Mhm.
So you want the letter up?
Yes, let's start with the letter and then.
Because he was sent the whole pack.
Oh,
So,
Yeah,
go
you-
to the very beginning, the cover page from the State Department of Ed.
Price.
yes.
I know, you deleted something.
Yeah, yes, definitely. There we go. Yeah, can you make that a little larger?
Oh, you said it's only at the end. That was on the last page.
The letter to me.
Awesome. Okay, this is the letter, Ms. Perrin got. Could you start us off and just tell us a little bit about the letter?
I received this notification. This is from the State Department of Education, where they asked basically for the Board of Education to give comment on this specific contract between State Board of Education and Achievement First, which is a charter management organization. So it's for whole school management services between Achievement First Inc. and Achievement First Bridgeport. So it's the charter management organization as well, and the agreement that they have with the site that they have here. And I guess they want our specific comments about the overall contract because of course we sit on the charter school boards, and then we have to provide services for special education students and so forth. So my assumption is that this happens on a regular basis. I don't know. This is, of course, my first time experiencing it. So that they want just comments about it. I don't know whether they're going to respond with any comments to the inquiries that we make, but I guess they want to know where we stand as a public school board of education as it relates to this charter management organization.
Okay, thank you. And you received this May 5th, when the letters dated May 5th, we got it stamped on May 8th.
So I got the actual, they sent me an email on the 5th, and then the hard copy came into the office on May 8th. So that's what the stamp is about.
Right, so they basically giving the board 11 days to get itself together and make a formal comment on this contract.
Yes.
Yeah, I would have, and you said this is the first time you experienced this as a superintendent?
Yes.
Okay.
Have no clue, have no clue.
I got
Won't tell you the truth.
I got some news for you. This is a state statute that's supposed to happen all the time. This is the first time I'm experiencing it as a board member in 6 years. So how often are these things renewed? I know we got at least 2 charter schools that use charter school management organizations. And I would like to understand, maybe you can reach out to the state on how these were signed in the past without the Board of Education, and maybe the superintendent took upon themselves to be the Board of Education. It doesn't say superintendent of schools, it does say superintendent. So I want to know why this board has never discussed something like this before. But on the first part, this is.
That's fine.
That's honestly took me by surprise. I was like, wow, we get to comment on charter school contracts.
I saw the face.
First time I heard that, never heard either.
So now they only give us a certain amount of turnaround time. So I would like you also to ask the state to give us a little bit more turnaround time so we can put more thought into our commentary. But right now, they're just gonna basically get it in piecemeal because at this point, we can only respond as individual board members, not as a whole board and a whole statement of policy, because they did not allow us enough time. Right. So now on to, excuse me, now on to the service agreements. All right, if you can, all right, you can slowly go page by page, Does anybody, does somebody bring up the email? Do you have Mr. Traber's email with his question? Somebody could ask the question. Yes.
One second.
Please. I'm going. And I addressed my first 2 concerns with this.
That's good.
Another concern is I've seen no course structure in here, but I do know from perusing the public information available from 2021 Form 990 that they did in fact pay the charter management organization 1.4 million plus for the year for a total of 1,100 students. That's my first comment on there. That seems to be an excessive amount of over $1,000 per pupil in management fees. Do we know where we stand in contrast?
As far as management fees for the charter school?
No, as far as what we would pay similar services to manage our schools, because I'm sure we're far lower than $1,000 per pupil.
No, I don't know. I will tell you that I do, because I do not.
Maybe that's something to have.
Yes.
And another question I had is this $1.4 million contract is sending money basically away from the school. Is there any bidding process or any other organizations that can do this work for perhaps less money? Perhaps if something like this was opened up for bidding, perhaps even school districts could bid to provide these services, and perhaps and lesser, more efficient cost to the state and community taxpayers. Yeah, I think most of my comments would be questions. Comments. I'm looking for I'm looking for lottery. I would like to make a comment on the lottery process in conjunction with the diversity of the school. Yes.
On page.
I'm trying to find a spot. So I'm on page of my notes. Yeah. I'm trying to find they got lottery and non-discrimination. But my comment would be looking at district profile and performance for both schools. You would have achievement first has 49.1% African Americans. Oh, wait, hold on, let me correct myself, I'm looking at the wrong spot. Okay, the enrollment. African Americans is 53% African Americans, 43% Latinos,
Stop it.
and 1.4% white.
Yeah.
Whereas Bridgeport Public Schools, where they draw their lottery from, have 30% African Americans, 55% Hispanics, and 9.6% white. Any true randomized lottery should be pretty close to those numbers. So I would like to see maybe the lottery portion pulled out and maybe given to an independent firm or something, because those numbers, and even if you look at English language learners, we've got, as a district, we've got 23.1%, and they've got 13.5%. Again, with a truly randomized lottery, those percentages should be nearly equal. So I would like an explanation to the big disparity in the lottery process and the demographics.
So can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So the way you want this captured is that as a comment that there seems to be a disparity between the student demographics of students at the charter school versus, Bridgeport Public School District, and you have the inquiry that the lottery is not randomized.
Right. The lottery does not appear to be randomized based on the student demographics of the students. Not just on racial demographics, but also multi-language learners. And it seems like they're pretty much. Let me look at the disabilities. Nope, disabilities again, 19.1 for the district and 9.4 for Achievement First. Again, with a randomized lottery, those numbers should be nearly identical. And this data, anybody wants to verify, it's on the district profile performance on the CSD website. You can find it for the years 21, 22. 22, 23 numbers are not up yet. So this is the latest available data with the latest available disparities between the charter school, Achievement First, and the district, the city of Bridgeport, where they draw the students from. What else do I have? Also, would like to look at this is chronic absenteeism. Whereas the district, we got 27.8 and 21.22. Where they got 52.1% chronic absenteeism on the Insight website. Yes, is our number right for 21, 22? Yeah. So their corresponding number is 52.1 is Achievement First.
Right, and ours,
According to 21, 22 Insight number.
that's a huge number.
Yes. And also, number of students qualified as truant under state statutes for Achievement First is 866, according to the 21, 22 profile and performance report. I think they got like an 1,100, 1,200 student population, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, wait, let's see, I could actually add that up together. 599 plus 506 is 1,105. So 866 students out of 1,105 are qualified as truant under state statute. Quite concerning, whereas ours is 7,537 out of 19,000, at a percentage rate of 27 point. Oh wait, no, it's not broken down percentage, but I would imagine that's 20. 30% versus about 80%. So those wide numbers are bothersome. So perhaps as part of my contract conversation, they should seek additional services from Achievement First Incorporated and include in improving their student attendance numbers. Because they are Bridgeport students, we want them in school learning, no matter whether they're in a charter school or state school. So that's my other comments.
You want me to read Mr. Traver's questions?
I got one more. I don't think I'm duplicating any. One more would be, as far as student transportation and school calendar. I think somewhere in there that they should, include the language that they will coordinate their school calendar with the host district's calendar. Because at times we've had to send buses when our schools were not in session and their schools were in session, and increasing the costs incrementally for the district. That's all I have.
But I think I missed the first one. I think I got lost. Because you were talking about a $1.4 million contract, but I wasn't able to capture what you wanted me to.
Yeah, the current, there's no number in the contract currently, it's just at 10%. So that 10% represents $1.4 million that's being drawn out before it's a student. And this 10% has been in place for quite a while. I'm wondering if we could maybe Achievement First could negotiate a lower percentage, since a lot of it's finding buildings and a lot of the services are already, all the heavy lifting is done as far as establishing Achievement First as a charter school. So maybe the historical percentage that they're receiving off the top before it goes to the public, before it goes to the students, could be lowered in to maybe 8%, 7%. It's worth exploring, because that could bring $300,000, $400,000 more back into the schools. So this contract's being negotiated for the best value for the student in Achievement First.
So the first one, that Mr. Traber, who is not here today, he's in Hartford. He was talking about the time to review. So the same thing that you asked me to ask Ms. Parisi, so that we'll be able to have more discussion around the comments. So that will be in a separate email. Okay. And section 5.8 refers to an annual charter management evaluation program. Why are we provided a copy of the actual evaluation, which is used to justify this agreement? Okay. One. And section 6.2 refers to the recruitment and admission of students. What steps does Achievement First, the charter management organization, take to encourage and to facilitate the application of non-English speaking applicants, which you talked about in disparity of the numbers? Section 7.4D refers to Achievement First's obligation to raise a specified dollar amount of private funds. How much money was raised by AF in each of the last 5 years? And section 7.4E refers to Achievement First's option to reduce its 10% service fee if there's a significant difference between the per pupil amount of state funds given to Bridgeport Public Schools and Achievement First Bridgeport. Has this ever occurred? If so, please provide the details of dates and amount of reduction. And in section 7.6 refers to the ancillary service fee. Can we obtain the specifics for the ancillary service fees charged for the last 5 years? And lastly, in section 14.7 refers to Connecticut Freedom Information Act and the Achievement First Academy Bridgeport Board's rights to Achievement First records and files related to the administration of the school, including the compensation paid to AF and any expenditures of such compensation. I would like to request such records and files for the last 5 years. Those are the things that he listed.
Can you email us?
Well, yeah,
You're good. Jen.
Yeah.
Mr. Benahan, do you have any questions?
No questions. No, maybe.
Mr. Gallen?
Very good.
No questions for me.
Any comments or anything you would like to add? If you think of any, I think, when do you have to send this back to the state?
The 19th, by the 19th.
By the 19th.
So Friday.
Right, and I would also suggest that you solicit members that aren't here to just give randomized comments if they wish to do so. So everybody has an opportunity. Normal case, this, in a best case world, this would be brought to you probably a month or two ago. So we could bring it to a committee for discussion, bring it before the board to gather our questions and have the force of the board. These are the board approved questions. But right now, you just got input from individual board members rather than the board as a whole. Correct. And again, I would like to find out where this has been all my life.
I wrote it differently, but
Yes, you got, it's straight to the, I'm the elected official. Thank you. So, we've covered a lot of information now. There cannot be a motion to adjourn because this is no longer a meeting. It's an informational session for the last
7:32.
So we could just shut off the YouTube and everybody have a great night.
Good night. God bless you all.
Yes, well.
Good night.
Mr. Gallows.
It is.